right, Mr. Moran. I am here in the chapel at our school. It occurred to me last week that a lot of you guys had never seen our chapel. So what I want to do is bring you into our chapel, right? So here's our altar. Let's see how I get that to go straight. There we go. Those are the altar, crucifix behind the altar, right? Tabernacles over there. It outlooks the courtyard where you can see the peacocks kind of walking around. We have the statue of St. Joseph in the back of the church, out of our chapel. The chairs right now are spaced out in a socially distant manner, of course, for when we do masses and everything like that in the morning. But what I thought I'd do is I'd sit in here, right, to teach our lesson for today, because I'm not going to have the time to teach it tonight when I get home. So this is like a chapel version of the Fireside chat. Let me move this a little closer, because that's a little far. There we go. All right, you can see my mama, right, Mary, right next to me. So all things are good. So hopefully you guys are having a good day at school while I'm out at Stella Maris on retreat. Just as we start here, a reminder, tomorrow we're going to have a quiz in class on sections 16, 17, 18, and 19. All right, so that starts with the story of Jacob and Esau, right, how they're wrestling inside the room of their mother, Rebecca, and then it goes right through to what we teach today in class. All right, so here we go. Let's go ahead and get started. Section 19, folks. Remember, before this section, right, Jacob had deceived Isaac into getting the blessing by dressing up as Esau, and Isaac relied on the sense of touch and the sense of smell in order to give Jacob the blessing. Esau, as a result, wants to kill Isaac. I'm sorry, not kill Isaac. Esau wants to kill Jacob, and so Rebekah is going to send Jacob away to her uncle's house in Haran. His name is Laban, and that's where we picked up our story. So here he is, and he arrives in chapter 29 of Genesis in Haran. So we go ahead and look right here on our iPad, section 19. Right? When he gets to Haran, what does Jacob start to do? He starts to ask people around, like, hey, do you know this guy Laban? Right? Because think about it. When he gets to Haran, there's no, like, yellow page directory or let me look up on his cell phone of how to get there. It's a matter of, is Laban alive? Is he still living here in Haran? Did he move? Like, maybe I can find somebody that can point me in the right direction. All right, and so he meets this group of shepherds. And he says to the shepherds, hey, do you know this guy Laban? And they're like, yes. And in fact, here comes his daughter Rachel right now with Laban's sheep. All right? So, like, Jacob is so thrilled over this, right? And there's this awkward story here at the beginning where all the shepherds used to wait for each other to come so they can move this giant stone away from the water to feed their flocks and all. And Jacob apparently is jacked, right? Apparently he's jacked, right? And it says that what he does is he goes up to the stone by himself and he rolls the stone away. The stone that would have taken 4 or 5 shepherds to move together, Jacob is able to push away by himself. So I guess he's not so much of a mama's boy hanging him on the tents as we had thought. All right? It says in verse 9, while he was still talking with him, Rachel arrived with his father's sheep. All right? And he goes over, he introduces himself to her, bursts into tears, and she is going to run and tell her father the good news. All right? And in verse 14, Laban is going to invite Jacob to live with the family, right? So Laban's like, great, it's so good to have you. Welcome to Haran. You can go ahead and live with me. All right, I'm going to take a drink. All right, this is my office mug, right? As you can hold on, let me flip it over here. It's from The Office, right? Unbelievable show, right? And, this is it, right? I must be, right? There's only one mug like this in the world, so it must go to me. So, sorry, everybody. Here we go. You only get it if it's true. So there it is. All right, world's best husband. Which is not going to really apply to Jacob in the stories that we're about to read. So hence the title. All right, so here we go. Verse 14b. Right, it says the marriage to Leah and Rachel. After Jacob had stayed with him a full month, Laban said to him, should you serve me for nothing just because you are a relative of mine? Tell me what your wages should be. Now Laban had 2 daughters. The older was Leah, the younger Rachel. Leah had lovely eyes, but Rachel was well-formed and beautiful. Now, let's just pause there for a moment. If you had to pick two ways, or one of the two ways to be described, would you rather somebody say you have lovely eyes, or would you rather someone say you're well-formed and beautiful? I would imagine that most people would go with the well-formed and beautiful, right? Because this is biblical speech for saying Leah was ugly, Rachel was gorgeous. All right? And so in verse 18, Jacob had fallen in love with Rachel, and so he says to Laban, I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel. Laban replied, I prefer to give her to you than to an outsider. Stay with me. So Jacob is going to work for 7 years in order to pay off the marriage price for Rachel. All right? That's kind of what he wants. All right, verse 21. Verse 21. At the end of the 7 years, Jacob says to Laban, give me my wife that I might consummate my marriage with her, for my term is now completed. So Laban invited all the local inhabitants and gave a great feast. At nightfall, he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and Jacob consummated the marriage with her. Laban assigned his slave girl Zilpah to his daughter Leah as her maidservant. Uh-oh. In the morning, Jacob was amazed. He wakes up, and it was Leah. Oh no! He's like, what had just happened? Right? I didn't want to marry Leah. I wanted Rachel, right? I married the ugly one. This isn't good. Right? And he goes to Laban, like, Laban, what's the deal, man? I worked 7 years for you to marry Rachel, and you tricked me into marrying Leah. Ah, the deceiver has been deceived. The duper has been duped. Got him. Right? It's not good for Jacob to be deceiving all these people. And here Laban is going to do the same trick now to Jacob. And Laban simply replies, right, it is not our custom to marry off a younger daughter before an older one. Finish the bridal week for this one, and then I will give you the other one in return. Right, so it's kind of like, how did this happen? Click on the did you know right there on page 47. How did Jacob not know this was Rachel? Well, it gives you some information. The wedding ceremony was a long couple days, right? It was usually about a week long, which drinking was a big part of it. So when Leah was presented to Jacob in the tent at night, it would have been dark. She would have had a veil covering her face, and Jacob probably would have been drinking. And so he ends up marrying the wrong sister. All right? Jacob will agree. All right, no big deal. Laban, I will work another 7 years in order to marry Rachel. So in verse 28, we learn that in the course of 2 weeks, Jacob goes from having 0 wives to having 2, and then having to work another 7 years. So Jacob will in total work a total of 14 years to marry Rachel. Now, there are 2 slave servants that we need to know. Zilpah is going to be the maidservant of Leah, and Bilhah is the maidservant of Rachel. I have those in the notes. You can click on those in Schoology to see those notes. All right. Why do those people matter? Notice, right, he's going to consummate his marriage with Rachel. We're looking at verse 30. Jacob then consummated his marriage with Rachel, and he loved her more than Leah. Thus he remained in Laban's service another 7 years. Notice, world's best husband, not Jacob, right? You can't. That's just not good, right? This is not good. This is scandalous, all right? And this is only going to get worse, right? So just kind of, this is going to get all like, Desperate Housewives of 2000 BC, Cana edition. This is going to get crazy, all right? Because what's going to happen here, right? And this is not in your notes anywhere. So if you turn the page and look on page 49, you're going to see the family chart. Right? You'll see the family chart. All right? So what's going to happen is when God sees that Jacob loves Rachel more than Leah, he's going to make Leah fertile and Rachel infertile. And so Leah is going to be able to have children and Rachel isn't. All right? So what's going to start happening here is right off the bat, Leah is going to start strong by having 2 sons, right? Two sons, right? Reuben and Simeon. She's then going to have another two sons, Levi and Judah. So if you're following along at home, the score is Rachel 0, Leah 4. Now, as was the custom of the day, was if you couldn't have children, you would give your maidservant to your husband to have children for you. So when Rachel realizes that she's getting creamed in the score 4-0, she's going to give her maidservant Bilhah over to Jacob to sleep with, and she's going to have two children, Dan and Naphtali. So if you're keeping track of the score at home, it's Leah 4, Rachel 2, but really Leah 4, Rachel 0, Bilhah 2. Now, when Leah realizes that she has stopped having children after having the 4, she is going to give her maidservant Zilpah over to her husband to have children. And she's going to have two more sons named Gad and Asher. So if you're following along at home, it's Rachel 6. That's 6, right? 6. But really, Rachel 4, Bilhah 2, Zilpah 2. Rachel still 0. After that, Leah is going to have two more sons who are Issachar and Zebulun. So now if you're following along at home, right, it is Leah 6, Bilhah 2, Zilpah 2, Rachel still 0. And that's when God remembers Rachel. Now remember, we talked about those lines. When God remembers so-and-so, it means that he's now going to start to work in their lives in a very real way. So God remembers Rachel. She is going to have a son, and his name is Joseph. Right? Joseph. Rachel will have a second son. His name is Benjamin, and Rachel will die giving birth to Benjamin. So the final score is Leah 6, Zilpah 2, Bilhah 2, Rachel 2, but she passes away giving birth to Benjamin. All of that is lined up in this chart here. You can't even see the chart, right? I don't think you can see that. Right there, there's that chart in your book. All right. So that's kind of like the shenanigans, right? This like Desperate Housewives of Cana 2000 BC edition, right, that goes on with this. So Jacob ends up having 12 sons in total. The favorite son is going to be Joseph. Why? Because that's the oldest son of the wife he loved, Rachel. All right. Then we get into this, go back to verse 23 on page 48. We see this interesting story, right, where Jacob is going to wrestle with an angel. It says, in the course of that night, Jacob arose, took his 2 wives and the maidservants and his 11 children and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he had taken them across the stream, he had brought over all his possessions. Jacob was left there alone, and some man wrestled him with him until the break of dawn. Now this is just weird, right? So Jacob's like standing there by himself, and a guy walks up to him like, yo man, you want to wrestle? It's like, what? And they do, they wrestle. And notice, when the man saw that he could not prevail over Jacob, he struck Jacob's hip in its socket so that his hip socket was wrenched. It's almost like this person that was wrestling with like sucker punches right in the hip, and Jacob's like, ah. Right? And the man said, let me go, for it is daybreak. And Jacob said, I will not let you go until you bless me. What is your name? And he answered, Jacob. Then the man said, you shall no longer be spoken of as Jacob, but as Israel. Now the word Israel, the name Israel, means he who struggles with God. All right, write that down. The name Israel means he who struggles with God. Okay? Notice we see this name change happening. We saw the same thing happen with Abraham. We said that a name change signifies that I am now going to be in a direct relationship with God. All right? And so we find out that who was Jacob wrestling with here? He was wrestling with like an angel. And I think it's fantastic to know that God is going to allow us to kind of overpower, that we are in this relationship with him. He does not just overpower us and beat us into submission to get us to do what he wants. He is willing to work with us in our lives. All right? So that's good. So that's all we need for a class for tomorrow, all right? Section 20 we'll do on Wednesday after the quiz. So remember, tomorrow your quiz is going to be on sections 16, 17, 18, and 19. Make sure you get the notes that I'll put in the Schoology here for you for this section. And if you guys need anything, just let me know. All right, have a wonderful day, and make sure you check Schoology for anything. If you need anything, just email me. I'm praying for you, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. See you later. Moran out. Mr. Moran, that's who I am.